Today it is time to refine your spiritual discernment, to refine the way that you interpret, understand, and come to be introduced to new teachings. You might have a new teaching that you've just come across. It might be mysterious. It might be something that you feel like is resonant with you. You might wonder if it's really going to be useful to you, if it's actually pointing you to the truth. Well, today I'm excited to present a 5-question test to help you get at the truth of whether a new teaching that you've come across, a new teacher that you've come across, is actually going to help you as you go along your path. So let's get into it. So as I mentioned in the intro, this is going to be sort of another tool in our toolkit, in our toolbox, to help us with spiritual discernment. And I'll go through what I consider the 5-question test, and perhaps there are other questions that you'll find helpful, but I've found these to be integral anytime I come across a new teaching. Now, of course, over time, you might be able to intuit the answers to these questions without even having to ask them, and you listen to a teaching or you listen to a teacher presenting a teaching, whether it's their own, whether it's something that's been passed down, and you find it like immediately, yes, this is pointing to the truth. But if you're not there, or if you're hearing somebody talk about something that you think has been, really helpful to them, or they at least say has been really helpful to them, this 5-question test can be really helpful in pointing us toward, is it something that is actually going to be useful to our own journey, our own path? Because not all forms of the universal course, as many of us like to talk about, are going to be useful to us in the form that we're at. Truth is truth, of course, but sometimes the form that particular teaching takes may not really be what we're ready for or what will work best with where we're at in our journey. So, a lot of us, if you're like me, you're someone on the path, you're moving towards awakening, perhaps you've had an awakening and you're kind of working on stabilizing that experience of oneness, that experience of non-duality, that experience of unity in whatever terms you describe it. I should mention that today's 5-question test is not denominational in any way. It is sort of spiritual path agnostic. It doesn't matter what path you're on, which way up the mountain you're going, what teachings you're finding yourself sort of encountering on your way up the mountain. This is just about getting at the truth of whether this teaching, whatever you're coming across, is going to be useful to you. So I might give some examples, like from my own experience, of like the teachings that have actually resonated with me, like where they fall in the sort of answers to these questions. But questions are not really just meant to be like yes or no, but also something for you to marinate on. So I really want to get across that this isn't about like gatekeeping spirituality and saying, well, that teaching is impure, or that teaching doesn't count, or something like that. Or like spiritual snobbery, where it's like my spiritual ego says that your teaching is not real or your teaching is not correct. It's actually the opposite. It's about tuning into love. It's about sitting with these questions, not rushing to an answer and saying, where is the truth here? What does love want to say to me in relation to this teaching? So let's get into these 5 questions, because I think that's what we're all here for, and that's what's going to be most helpful. So the first question, and these are in no particular order, but I feel like you got to start with this one, because if it fails this question, then I don't really see any place for it. This first question in our 5-question test is there any fear or shame involved? If fear or guilt is the engine of a particular spiritual practice, then it may be or likely is misaligned with truth. Does the teacher or the teaching or the person presenting this teaching use any kind of fear or of punishment or shame or guilt to motivate transformation? If it does, then at best it is an incomplete understanding of the teaching, because I would say, again, this is all my opinion and my experience, but I would say that any teaching that will take you from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain is based in love. It is not based in fear. If we understand that the opposite of love is not hate, but fear. Fear is of the ego, and not in like a, I'm here to just love the ego kind of sense, but like it's what the ego tells us to motivate us to do things. It makes us fearful. And so if it's not based in love, if there is fear and shame involved in the teaching, then I would say probably steer clear from it. If you're encountering a form of like Christianity, for example, that is really based in fear, really based in shame, really based in sin, it may be, don't get me wrong, you may find aspects of it useful to you, but at some point you will have to graduate to a new interpretation or new understanding in which love is the basis of the teaching. That love is the basis of the entire theology. Because if it's not, well, then you're really just running in circles with your ego, thinking that you're getting spiritual, thinking that you're being saved. And ultimately you're kind of going to get into this vicious loop where you find yourself back at square shame, not square one, but square shame, So that is a really important one. If you find yourself attracted to the teaching out of fear, so like, for example, if like a bunch of your friends are really into a particular way of understanding their own spirituality and you are attracted to the teaching out of fear of missing out because you want to be like part of the group and you don't want to miss out on whatever it is they're discovering about themselves, the teaching may have truth to it. You may find a lot of truth in like astrology, for example, in helping to release yourself from sort of egoic traps and stories. But if the only reason you're doing it is out of fear, and that's what's involved in the teaching in its form for you at the time, it probably would be best to steer clear from it, because maybe you can encounter a teaching like astrology later in your life when you're not driven by fear to embrace it. But if fear is the motivating factor, it's going to be an egoic trap. It's not going to really help you get to where you're trying to go, up the spiral, up the mountain, up the stairs, however you want to think about it. So that's the first question. Is there any fear or shame involved? If there is, whether it's because it's your own projection or it just, the teacher literally is talking about that, either way, I think it's best to steer clear and pause and say, is this really going to help me, or can I listen to an inner voice? And we'll get to that later. Okay, so question 2, which is related for sure, especially with the second way that I expressed, like the way that fear can be involved. So question 2 is, what do I expect to get out of this teaching? So this is an invitation to notice, is the ego hoping to, quote, win or gain specialness or get somewhere, quote, better in any way? And one way you can ask this question in a different form to yourself is, am I trying to use this to escape being here now? So to get back to like astrology, for example, because that's such a fun game to play for a lot of us and is really helpful to a lot of us, but also can be misused, I think, because of maybe the level that it's at. It's hard to say exactly why, but it could be very easy if you have a hard time with your daily life, your job, something going on with a friendship, whatever, and you dive into the world of astrology and learning all these things about yourself and sort of the character that the astrological chart paints you to be, and it actually, you use it, feel this temptation, or you are actually going through it and you use it to avoid thinking about all these other things. So for example, you might have a tough relationship with your best friend, and you just continue to go back to astrology as a reason to say why the situation is the way it is, without really confronting the discomfort of having the difficult conversation. So you say, well, I'm not going to have that conversation with them, or I'm not going to face what I need to face there. And obviously you wouldn't put it in those terms, but I'm not going to face that because like they're just a Taurus. I'm a Taurus. So I'll throw the Taurians under the bus. Like they're a Taurus. They're not going to get it, so like, why do I even try? I'm not going to, they don't deserve my love here because they're an unhealed Taurus. If you find yourself sort of engaging in that, and obviously it might be more subtle at first, then the teaching probably isn't going to be very useful, because what you're trying to get out of it is escape. Now, if you are going to astrology, for example, and you say, wow, I didn't realize that like these are characteristics of a Taurus, and particularly unhealed, and that their potential is like this. how can I have some more love for this friend who's going through what they're going through? And I felt like I didn't want to talk to them or be open to them or be present with them. And it turns out they actually need support in this way. So if in that case, astrology is illuminating something for you, and what you're getting out of it is actually a dissolution of the ego and a sense of the shared identity between you and your Taurus friend, might be me, then, that actually is worth pursuing, because it's going to help you with where you're at in the journey. So hopefully you're getting the sense that this is not about a teaching being right or wrong. This is about whether a teaching is going to actually pass this test for you right now in your journey, on your path, in the part of the mountain, part of the spiral staircase that you are on right now. So again, this is an invitation to notice if the ego is hoping to get something out of it, like achieve something or receive something or steal something, hoping to win something or gain specialness or achievement, or be like, I'm going to be so holy when I go through this practice, if that's the case, then it doesn't mean the teaching is wrong. Like I said, it's just an opportunity to pause, because ultimately, if the most sort of truth-packed teachings are working, your ego is not going to really have much place there. Again, don't confuse your ego with you. The ego is the illusion part of you. The ego is the illusion on top of who you are. The ego is projection. So I know some people talk about ego as something that needs love. I would say that it's an important distinction to make, that the ego is the bundle of thoughts that are speaking fear into your mind. The part that when people say I need to bring love to my ego, what the way I take that to be is to not push any of those thoughts away, but to recognize them for what they are. So to not push anything away, to accept and to appreciate everything that's going on, I would say that's bringing love to the ego. So bringing love to the ego is not saying, okay, ego, I appreciate you, I'm going to listen to you. That's not what this is about. We want to have the spiritual discernment here. So in other words, the question, what do I expect to get out of this teaching, is what does my ego think it's going to get out of this teaching? And it doesn't mean you don't go into the teaching, because it doesn't make a teaching right or wrong. It's just something to be aware of, to pause, to hold in your mind as you sort of enter into the teaching. So with that in mind, let's move into who I am, or who you are, or who a teaching says we are, and move to question 3. So question 3 is, who does this teaching say that I am? Does it affirm your divine nature or reinforce a separated self-image? So is your identity framed as inherently whole, divine nature, or fundamentally broken, separated self-image? If there is a context that is given in which you perhaps a teaching says, like A Course in Miracles or sort of non-dualistic mystical teaching says, who you think you are will always be fundamentally broken, because that's not who you really are. Who you really are is the divine nature, is the I am presence, is love itself, capital L love, is God, the Godhead, Jesus, Christ, Buddha mind, Buddha nature, the Tao itself. There is nothing but the Tao. If a teaching is saying that and puts it all in context, that's one thing. And I think that actually can be very helpful, because it helps clear up some things about the ego, because I think a lot of us think a teaching is saying, okay, let's run away from the ego, and then we don't have an understanding of what the ego is in context of the illusion that it made. So when we're asking, who does this teaching or this teacher say that I am, it's about understanding. Similar to that, is it coming from fear? Is it coming from love? It's saying, who are you really? So to go back to like the example of astrology, for example, if in astrology, a lot of people take it to say that astrology is saying that I am only a Taurus with an ascendant in Cancer and, all these extra things, and that's all I am. And it just puts me in a box. That perception a projection, I would say, but perception of the teaching would mean that the teaching is not going to be so useful to that person unless they say unless they can recognize that this resistance that I'm having to the teaching of astrology, that thinking that it's putting me in a box in a container, is profound potential for growth. If I can get past and surrender that resistance, that's one thing. That's one thing, and that that we'll get to that with kind of question 5/question 4. But if for example, the teaching of astrology is saying that no, who I am cannot be contained. And actually these containers are temporary based on this incarnation. And it's just helpful for me to understand and have a little bit more of a guidebook of what lessons I am here to learn in this incarnation. If that's the case, then that's actually recognizing that who I am is beyond the bounds of one incarnation. And then if you have that interpretation of astrology, well, then it can be very, very helpful for you depending on what point of the journey you're on. So again, is your identity framed as inherently whole or fundamentally broken? If it's framed as inherently whole, despite a story it might have about itself of being fundamentally broken, well, that's great. But if it starts and ends by saying, I'm fundamentally broken because I was born in sin, I'm a sinner, and I have to spend my entire life, asking for forgiveness and reminding myself that a particular teacher or being like Jesus in Christianity died for my sins, and there's something fundamentally broken about being human. I think depending on where you take that, it could be helpful at a certain part of the journey in like maybe recognizing where you've, been misled and done wrong in your life, but it's not gonna, I just have this sense that it just isn't gonna last that long on the journey, because you're going to have to graduate, like I said before, to a sense of, well, who am I really? You're going to end up practicing that self-inquiry. And when you ask, who am I? You need to be able to let go of the answer, I'm fundamentally broken, because that's just going to be another ego thought in the mind. And when you ask that question, who am I really? You open up yourself to the space, to the spaciousness, to the non-dual awareness that is love, that is God, that is the Tao. And at that point, it would kind of be silly to even, suggest that I am something fundamentally broken. I mean, that's to completely limit ourselves in kind of such an absurd way, in a way that's kind of like the ego's last stand, last resistance before it sort of dissolves into the present moment. So in any case, who does the teaching say that I am, really? And that can be an open question, just like all of these. Okay, so let's get into question number 4. So where on the ladder of awakening is this teaching for? So I've been kind of getting into this a lot with the other pieces of the puzzle here in our little toolbox, our 5-question test, which is, it sort of asks you to recognize what part of the journey you are on. Are you healing from something that happened yesterday? And where you're at is just letting go of the thoughts and recognizing I'm not my thoughts, and just being there. If there's a teaching that just helps you do that, then that helps you do that. Because sometimes teachings that might feel off to us just really aren't for us right now. And ultimately, all teachings, if they have any sense of rootedness in truth, really do serve us as long as we place them in the right context. So a great example, I think A Course in Miracles is a wonderful example of this, because A Course in Miracles uses Christian terminology to, you might say, get its point across. It's a non-dual Christian mystical text, basically. And in many ways, it can be something that feels off to someone when they first read it, because they're like, well, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe Jesus is the teacher here. Like, I don't even know if Jesus existed, and if he did, he's definitely not the Son of God or something, kind of having this skepticism or cynicism or total resistance to the terms being used, and unable to see that the way that the terms are being used completely transforms the meaning that we think they have, that our ego is projecting what God is, bearded man in the sky, what Jesus is, what any of this is, to kind of limit our ability to embrace the teaching. But if it feels off, and it doesn't feel like it's going to serve you, and you don't see truth in it, then it may just not be the time. It may be that, like it was 5 years ago for me, I hadn't come across A Course in Miracles yet, or the teachings of Neville Goddard, or just understanding the Bible as a mystical text even, or, just a mystical interpretation of anything Judeo-Christian. I was busy kind of studying the Tao and the Tao Te Ching. And that was very, very helpful because it doesn't mention God. It says the Tao, and the Tao, roughly translating to just the wayness of things, the way of things, the way things are going, the flow, however you want to think about it. There's not really a word for it. And that was really what I needed at that point in the journey, because I needed something that could sort of like embrace and account for the paradox that is the absurdity of this experience, But once I, around 4 or 5 years ago, had really gone deep into sort of Taoism and different Eastern philosophies, religions, spiritual practices, mystical traditions, then when I come back to Judeo-Christian terminology and I realize, oh, God is that same ineffable happeningness, substanceness thing that I was understanding the Tao to be. They're just two different words for roughly the same thing, the same formlessness. And at that point, then the part of the ladder that I'm on, I am ready for it. And in fact, it's perfect because now I'm ready equipped with the understanding and the discernment of truth that I had been learning and answering those previous questions about the teachings that I'd been on and kind of applying to my daily practice and just life and practice in general, is that now the meanings had opened up to me. Like who Jesus is not a man. I mean, I have no problem believing in Jesus, the man, and anything, but I don't think it matters. And that's what's beautiful about it, is it's not a big deal. It doesn't really matter either way, because I know that the truth of it is that Jesus, what he sort of accomplished, you might say, was the Christ mind, in the same way that all of us have the potential to accomplish a state of consciousness that is the Christ mind, the shared identity, unity of all of our minds as one, as the single child of God, an emanation of God, the Godhead in complete connection with God, never left home, and that's not an understanding that I could have come to 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago. And so there are different parts of the ladder, and I came to a part of the ladder where it was like, okay, I'm really ready to see the truth of every single teaching. I'm ready to let go of all resistance to any teaching. And the only reason I would not work with a particular teaching is if it feels like it's for a previous part of my journey and that I'm not in need of it. But I'm not attached to a particular way of explaining what's ineffable. Ultimately, words are so clumsy and fail us anyway. So where on the ladder of awakening is this teaching for? If it's at this point in the journey that you're on and it feels very intuitively right, and sometimes that means you'll feel a little resistance to it, but if it feels off, like sketchy, like, oh, I don't think I should be doing that, then you probably let it go. By this point, you're in 4 questions in. If it doesn't pass the other questions and then you're asking this one, it probably isn't the time. If it passes all of the other questions, and the reason why it feels like it may not quite be on the ladder, and it's because it's asking you to take a step forward, well, then I say go for it. And I think there are a lot of teachings out there that will meet you where you are and kind of help you along, Okay. So that's the 4th question. So let's get to the 5th question, which ultimately I think is, when it really comes down to it, it's the most important, not because it's like in form the most important, but because in regardless of what level you're at, whether you are at the level of non-dual awareness or at the level that this world and time are in, this question is super important regardless of who you're going to be exposed to. So question number 5 is, does this teaching make me more loving or more fearful? Do you walk away from the teaching softer, more open-hearted, more at peace with others, more at peace with the world, more at peace with yourself? Are you more accepting? Do you have a soft smile? Are you more open? Are you more creative? Are you more able to allow the flow of creation flow through you? Are you more transparent? Are you more honest? Are you more forthcoming? Are you, you know, are you able to be quiet? Do you find yourself needing to fill the space? Are you able to let the space just be there? All of these kinds of questions are basically getting at, is the spiritual teaching, the practice, whatever it might be, having the impact on you that it should be having? And, ultimately, this is a question that can only really be answered and kind of digested and marinated on as you go through a teaching. So if it passes all those first 4 questions, then all that's really left to do is to try it and experiment. I mean, that's what we're here to do. We're here to experiment. And ultimately, if it passes all those 4 questions, you've marinated on it and you're kind of dabbling in it. And don't get me wrong, you don't have to answer all these questions before you open a book. It's more like these questions are what you carry with you as you open the book. It could be whatever form, listening to a podcast, practicing a meditation, whatever it might be. So just, does the teaching make you more loving? Does it make you more accepting? Does it make you more like the truth of who you are? And by this point, if you've gone through this question test, if you've been exposed to other teachings, I mean, at least conceptually, you have a sense of who we all really are, right? So those are the 5 questions. Just going back over them again. So question 1, is there any fear or shame involved? Question 2, what do I expect to get out of this teaching? Recognizing it might be, what does my ego expect to get out of this teaching? Question number 3, who does the teaching say that I am, really, in truth? Question 4 is, where on the ladder of awakening is this teaching for? What part of my journey is this teaching for? And am I at that part of my journey? Question 5 is, does this teaching make me more loving, more fearful, more accepting, more open, more honest, more willing, more tolerant, more warm, more present, more patient, more compassionate? All right. So getting to the application of these questions, I've kind of hinted at it as we've gone on, but these aren't meant to be a test where you say, okay, here's the new book of my teachings that I got online. Someone said that it was really good. Let me just go through and answer these questions. These are really, you will feel the intuitive pull, the attraction to a particular teaching. And when you do, whether it's because someone told you about it and you trust them and trust their experience, whether it's something you discovered on your own, these questions are something you carry with you as you go through it. And why I think this is so helpful is that if you apply these questions to your sort of state of mind as you enter in, they're kind of like your armor, like a soft armor, like a welcoming armor that just helps you kind of see the truth and get rid of the rest. You can do this sort of like by journaling, maybe, you take a day to read a particular teaching, read a particular book, whatever it might be. And then later on, you journal about it a little bit. You contemplate, you maybe pray about it, depending on your relationship to prayer. And you keep these questions within you as you kind of go with it and you sit with them. So kind of what I'm getting at here is that you use these questions not to disqualify a teaching, but really to qualify your alignment to said teaching. It's not about making a teaching right or making a teaching wrong. Although maybe I could say if a teaching doesn't teach you that you're love and that the love is the most important thing and sort of those like in some ways cliches, I would say it's not worth our time, but still, like, everything has some type of thing to teach us. It just might not be as deep as other things. A teaching of one thing might be like, remember, don't follow things that teach you to be in fear. That might just be the teaching it had to offer, while another might really teach you about the love that you are. So it's about qualifying your alignment to any particular teaching, not disqualifying anything. It's not snobbery. It's not saying they're right, I'm wrong, or they're wrong, I'm right, or they're right, I'm wrong. It's not about that. It's about qualifying your alignment, about recognizing where you are on your path, about doing the dance of spiritual practice. So a couple things I want to leave us with. The true teacher is always going to be within and not within your body, not even really within your individual mind, but within the mind. And so you're guided always. So these questions are not meant to be the be all end all. They're meant to, as I mentioned, to be sat with as you listen to the intuition. And these questions can kind of be the cloak of armor that you put around that intuition. So all outer teachings really are stepping stones back to that inner voice. And these questions can help bridge that sort of stepping stone gap, you might say. So I definitely encourage you to, trust yourself as you are. Trust that who you are is never in danger, is the spirit of this, beingness that is ultimately capital G God, capital S self. And that even when you are discerning all of this stuff, ultimately you're the one to trust, not your ego, but your true I am presence, the love that you are. That is the one you can listen to, because as A Course in Miracles talks about, it's the Holy Spirit or God's voice speaking to you. And you can trust that and use these questions to help you kind of engage with that part, engage with that loving part of yourself, and see where it goes from there. So remember, none of this is such a big deal. We're all just here to learn. We're all just playing a bunch of games, and everybody's doing their little thing, as I've come across many times in sort of when I've been in different experiences, meditations. It's like, we're all just here doing our little things here, and let yourself do your little things and see what you can learn along the way, and maybe sit with these questions if they are helpful to you as you encounter new teachings, new opportunities, new lessons, new learnings, new ways to connect. So thanks so much for your time. If there are any questions that you think would also be helpful to this test, or this sort of 5-part, 5-question test, I definitely would love to see what questions you have in mind. These are just the 5 that I feel like are really important for me to sit with anytime I encounter a new teaching, especially if I'm not sure how it connects to what I've kind of come across. Although I do have to say, like I kind of mentioned, as you intuit, as you trust that intuition, and these questions kind of just like sit in the background and are kind of there cloaking around you, you start to just pick up on what's true and you leave the rest, and you don't really need to entertain teachings that are clearly not going to be, useful to you at the part of the journey. So I do recommend that, or I would say, yeah, I do recommend that, like, treating this very lightly. Like, ultimately these questions, like any good teaching, hopefully this is a good teaching, are meant to kind of self-destruct. Like they're meant to unravel when you're done using them. And so in some ways you won't find yourself asking these questions after a certain point, and you'll just be sitting with the subtle sort of openness that these questions evoke. So hope you enjoyed, hope this is helpful, and hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time. Peace. Between dimensions of you, it's all that I do. It's as simple as that. Just let it be true.